High-level secret negotiations continue as rogue state Israel's military put under air and sea blockade. November 2, 2015. Benjamin Fulford.net. The rogue state of Israel has been put under an electromagnetic cordon sanitaire, meaning that its military airplanes are grounded and its warships are unable to leave their ports, according to Pentagon officials. The blockade has now been intensified because U.S. military and Russian government sources agree an Israeli F-16 jet fighter flying out of Ramon Air Force Base shot down a Russian airliner in the Sinai Desert on Halloween, killing 224 people. Quote, Israel is now stuck in its sandbox and can only bomb Gaza or shoot down airliners, a Pentagon official added. The downing of the airliner has also now opened the way legally for Russian attacks on Israel proper, the official said. The escalation of events prompted the Rothschild family, the Chinese Communist Party, the Gnostic Illuminati, the Pentagon, and others to send representatives to negotiate with the White Dragon Society, WDS sources say. More about this below, but suffice it to say these negotiations are ongoing and no conclusion has been reached as this article went to press. The representative of the Rothschild family last went to negotiate with the WDS immediately after the March 11, 2011 nuclear and tsunami terror attack against Japan. He expressed surprise the attack had failed, as intended, to force the evacuation of 40 million people from Greater Tokyo. He also said that despite the speculation generated by the arrows with the numbers 11.3 and 11.5 on the cover of the January issue of the Rothschild-controlled Economist magazine, that the Rothschilds were not planning any incidents on either November 3rd or 5th. The WDS said that regardless, the Rothschilds would have to pay compensation for their role in the 3/11 attacks, or else face, quote, serious consequences. The Gnostic Illuminati representative going by the name of Alexander Romanov also contacted the WDS. He said the Illuminati were hearing a major terror attack was planned for November 4th. Romanov was forcibly placed in a mental hospital after warning in advance of 3/11 that Japan was about to be hit with nuclear terror. The most likely location for the new attack, he said, was Texas. A good guess would be an attack on the Bush Nazi nuclear reprocessing plant at Amarillo, Texas, according to British MI6 intelligence sources. He may also have been referring to a move to once and for all decapitate the Bush Zionist mafia. The people at the Pentagon and the agencies, meanwhile, say that any major new terrorist mass murder incident would be the signal for an all-out attack on all cabal agents and families. In the meantime, pressure will keep being ratcheted up on Khazarian mafia operations around the world until their final surrender and the freedom of humanity is assured. The Russians have now been given permission by the Egyptian government to use bases in Egypt to attack Israeli proxy forces in the Sinai Desert and in Libya, they said. There's also a real possibility nuclear weapons would be used against Israel and their ISIS proxy army in retaliation for Israeli and Saudi use of nuclear weapons in Japan, Yemen, and the Ukraine, they said. The capture in Lebanon of a Saudi prince transporting 2 tons of amphetamines and cocaine last week, nypost.com, resulted in frantic calls to both Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin and CIA Deputy Director David Cohen by King Salman of Saudi Arabia. Cohen, who is described by the Pentagon as the real head of ISIS, flew to Lebanon to get his release but failed to. He was also unable to get the release of the Israeli general captured commanding ISIS forces in Syria. This failure to obtain the freedom of the prince has strengthened the morale of the Russian, Hezbollah, Pentagon, Iranian, Syrian, Iraqi, Yemeni, and now Egyptian alliance raged against Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. The Saudis have hired Colombian, French, and other mercenaries to do their fighting for them, but these forces will not be able to stop Russia, the Pentagon, and their allies for forces this rogue state into defeat and surrender. Turkish President Recep Erdogan needs to understand this if he wishes to stay. The Pentagon and Russian forces blockading Israel are insisting that a rogue nation must give up all territory it seized illegally and pay massive compensation for the crimes it has committed. The WDS had a similar message for the Rothschild family representative concerning all the world wealth that family had stolen through its fraudulent, privately owned central bank debt slavery system. In any case, with more than half of European government bonds trading and minus interest rates, and with the real economies of Japan and the United States imploding, it is only a matter of time before this system fails. The Europeans are turning to China in the hopes of getting support for their collapsing system. The French, Germans, and British have all had, or will soon have, summit meetings with the Chinese in the past week or so with this in mind. News.xinhuinet.com. The Europeans are hoping to distance themselves from the implosion of Khazarian mafia control of the Federal Reserve Board in the United States by linking their financial systems to the Chinese yuan. To counter the Chinese-European rapprochement, the Pentagon has been busy working with the Russians and others to make sure the Chinese do not get military control over Asia. To this end, Vietnam has been supplied with nuclear weapons and advanced armaments in order to give them the ability to take on China over territorial disputes in the South China Sea, Pentagon sources said. The dispatch of a U.S. warship into waters claimed by the Chinese was a Pentagon move to convince Asian nations surrounding China that they were ready to defend them despite any financial deals between Washington and China, several sources said. The Chinese, for their part, sent a representative to discuss these issues with the White Dragon Society. The Chinese were told to stop being manipulated by the Khazarians into fighting Asian neighbors over historical differences. The Chinese also reassured the WDS they had no ambitions to take over from the U.S. as the only world superpower. Instead, they, reasonably, said that since Chinese represented 20% of the world's population, they should have 20% control over international institutions and power. This meeting was followed by a South Korea, Chinese, and Japanese summit meeting in South Korea last week where Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe appeared to be a born-again pacifist. It now looks like years of manufactured incidents and provocations over such issues as comfort women, tiny disputed islands, and other such things are going to be finally papered over. South Korean President Park Geun Hye also seemed to have dropped Khazarian-inspired baiting of Japan over such issues. The three nations have now agreed to look forward and not backwards in their relations. The sudden change in Abe's and Park's tune may be connected to the visit to South Korea by new Pentagon Chief Joseph Dunford, who made it clear that petty squabbles provoked by outsiders had to end. Abe's new tone may also be connected to the fact that Dunford is about to visit Japan, where he will be taking a close look at exactly what Richard Armitage, Dick Cheney, and others have been doing here. Pentagon sources promise Armitage will be, quote, dealt with. Part of this has already begun as Armitage's heroin business in Afghanistan continues to be dismantled. It now appears the Doctors Without Borders hospital that was bombed in Afghanistan was a heroin distribution center. According to the Russian TASS news agency, the Doctors Without Borders were kicked out of the eastern Ukraine because they were drug dealing. TASS.ru. It appears the probable murder by plane crash of Richard Rockefeller was part of a Bush Mafia move to take over his Doctors Without Borders organization and use it as a front. Rockefeller family sources say Richard was killed because he was about to blow the whistle on attempts by Bush and his fellow Khazarian Nazis to set off an Ebola epidemic. Time will tell, but it now appears this once noble organization has been taken over by the dark side. Meanwhile, South American sources have pointed out there is a Maurice Armitage who is running for mayor in the town of Cali, right in the center of Colombia's cocaine-producing region. He certainly looks a lot like Richard Armitage, so although we have not confirmed this, it looks a lot like Richard ran the heroin side of the Bush drug business while Maurice handled the cocaine end of things. In any case, there is a coordinated campaign going on to cut off the heroin, cocaine, and amphetamine money financing the Bush not-Zionist faction of the Khazarian mob. The arrest of the Saudi prince with 2 tons of amphetamines was a clear example of this. No wonder the Jeb Bush presidential campaign is running out of money. There's still a lot of work to be done, but anybody who follows the news around the world cannot deny now that the not-Zionists are losing power. To use the metaphor of World War II, the situation now is a lot like 1944, where the Nazi defeat was inevitable, but a lot of fighting still remained to be done. If we all push hard, we can finish these not-Zionist criminals off permanently by 2016.